Caroline and I spent our honeymoon in America, the good old US of A. Initially, I had my heart set on the West Indies, perhaps Martinique, but I was outvoted. As it turned out, I didn't regret it one bit. We flew British Airways from Heathrow and landed at JFK after several hours. Our attempt to join the Mile High Club was a spectacular failure, but that didn't matter. We more than made up for it while touring the East Coast, including New England. Coming from Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire, near Cambridge University, we were particularly thrilled by our visits to Yale and Harvard. The biggest surprise, however, was how wonderfully rural New York State turned out to be, completely different from what we had imagined. 3 weeks later, Caroline and I had undoubtedly made love in more motels than the average American would in a lifetime. We cherished every moment and vowed on the plane ride back that we'd return soon. It was a great plan and a fantastic idea, but unfortunately, real life and our careers got in the way. Fast forward 9 years, and I, Mark Wilson, and my wife Caroline found ourselves in our early 30s, happily married with no children and living in a lovely but heavily mortgaged house. Like many in our position at the time, we were living life to the fullest. I had recently been promoted to a junior director position at Alskins Lut, a leading company in high-tech incinerator plants. Despite being a small company, we were growing, and I had been fortunate to grow along with it. Under my boss Kevin, practically the owner, I was about 4th or 5th in line. Caroline had done well in her own right as a school teacher, though her career advancement depended on both length of service and ability. Occasionally, she grew frustrated seeing me surge ahead in my career. In hindsight, I wonder if that undercurrent of jealousy contributed to the actions she would later take. I'd say without a doubt that we were still in love. It might not have been with the same fiery passion we had when we first got married, but that was to be expected. Our love life wasn't bad at all. We had the occasional week or two of abstinence when both of us were under pressure, but these were balanced by more frequent bursts of intimate activities when we were in the mood. Our story begins during one of those longer periods of abstinence, with anticipation building for a much-needed period of intimacy. We hadn't taken a holiday in almost a year. Caroline had just finished her school term the previous week, and we were set to leave for a well-deserved break to the beaches of Spain the very next day. Caroline dragged me out shopping for new holiday clothes. Predictably, I ended up with just a single pair of shorts, while she picked out 4 or 5 new outfits, each more revealing than the last. It was the last outfit she chose that triggered a chain of events. On holiday, Caroline tended to be more adventurous and daring, often doing and wearing things she wouldn't normally consider at home. That day, it seemed she had already embraced the holiday spirit, and the blouse she picked reflected that perfectly. "Do you like it?" she asked, holding it up for my approval. "It's a bit see-through," I noted, without any real disapproval. "Then it's just what I'm looking for," Caroline replied. "I'd better try it on, then." She vanished into the changing room with the sheer black satin blouse, leaving me in the company of 6 or 7 other men waiting for their wives or girlfriends. I wondered whether Caroline would decide for herself or if she would come out to model it for me. Knowing she put on a fairly skimpy bra that morning, I figured a few guys might be in for a minor treat if she did come out. And come out she did, right into the waiting area. There was no peeking around the corner or calling me over discreetly like some women do. I had guessed wrong about one thing though, the bra. She must have been wearing the skimpy one earlier, but she had removed it to model the blouse. Male eyes, including mine, widened in surprise as Caroline spun around, showing off the new blouse. Well, officially showing it to me, but capturing everyone's attention nonetheless. It was black. It was flimsy. What more could I say? It covered her, well, sort of. It covered her up adequately. Well, I couldn't really say that. What was the word or phrase I was looking for? Hit her? No. Protected her assets? Certainly not. Covered her breasts? Well, not really. Guarded her modesty? Hardly at all. It would have been less erotic if she had been bare to the waist, and she was loving it. I couldn't honestly claim that I was upset, but she was loving it, the cheeky cow. Caroline bought the blouse, and we moved on to the next shop. Then we got the new bikini, if you could describe it as such. She disappeared into the changing room and seemed to take her time. Eventually, she pulled the curtain back and stood there for me to admire. Bloody hell. I found my heart pounding as I stood there looking at her, aware that at least a couple of other chaps waiting around were also getting eyeful. Caroline, I should explain, is a rather attractive young woman. She's about 5'3", reasonably slim, and with boobs that, though not more than a B cup, thrust out firmly as if issuing a challenge. Where's the top? I asked her once I managed to recover my powers of speech. We're going to Spain, Caroline proclaimed gleefully. Who needs a bikini top there? True, as it happened. We'd been there the year before, and after the first hour or two, my wife had discarded her bikini top and joined the many other women who were topless. To my knowledge, she never bothered with it again the whole time we were there. But a department store in Cambridge was hardly a beach in Spain. Do you like it then? She demanded, arching her back slightly to emphasize just how stunning her bare breasts were. Love it, answered at least two of the admirers looking on before I could utter a word either way. Caroline giggled at the attention she was getting and twisted around to offer a different angle. Can I have it then? She asked me while I stood there, unsure whether I should be embarrassed or turned on by her show. I give her one, said one of the guys cheekily, and the others all laughed. Okay, you can have it, I told her before the whole thing got out of hand. On the way home in the car, I got to thinking. Caroline wouldn't normally have acted quite like that, so something was up. My wife Caroline is one of those women who are strong-willed, and when I did something to upset her, she felt she had to get her own back. 4 months previously, she had flirted with one of her colleagues in front of me, and it ended up with her kissing him out on the dance floor, while I had to stand there watching them. I wasn't too sure where his hands were, either, for that matter. We had a fierce argument afterward about how she had humiliated me in front of everyone. Her response, it was all my fault. Apparently, I had forgotten the anniversary of our first date a few days prior, and she had decided to make me pay. The anniversary of our first date. When had we ever celebrated that, for Christ's sake? Then, about a month later, I got home late when we were supposed to be going out for dinner. I was held up in traffic coming back from a meeting with a client up north. 4 hours on the road, and an earlier accident on the motorway delayed me. I had even called to say I'd be late, but that didn't help. By the time I got home, she had already gone out and left a note saying she canceled the dinner reservation. No indication of where she went, just that she'd ring me in a bit so I could join her. A bit turned out to be over 3 hours later, and it wasn't so much an invite to join her as a demand to pick her up and give her a lift home. I told her exactly what I thought of her, and that she could make her own way home. She'd gone out alone, she could come home alone. Plenty of guys here would be more than happy to bring me home, Mark. I just don't know how I would be able to pay them back for their kindness. Those were her exact words. When I got to the club, I was fuming. It didn't help that I found Caroline surrounded by a cluster of young men, most of them at least 5 years younger than she was, all clearly hoping for a special ending to the evening. The skimpy dress she almost had on did nothing to dissuade them, nor did it calm me down. As I approached the group, at least 3 of them had their hands on her, around her waist, on her exposed shoulder, and another perilously close to her breast. "Excuse me, lads," I said as I carefully made my way through, cautiously pushing their hands away from her body. Time this little lady was going home. "Piss off, mate," one of them retorted, trying to shove me away. "We got her first. Go find your own bit of crumpet." "It's okay, boys," Caroline interrupted. "It's my husband come to save me. Sorry to break up the evening, but I'm afraid I'll have to go home with him." Oh dear. It looked as if things might turn nasty, and there was no way I stood a chance against the group of them. They weren't happy. It was clear they thought Caroline had been leading them on, and that I had shown up to rain on their parade. 2 of them, including the belligerent one, started to push me around. It had been years since I had been in a fight, not since school days, but I'm not the type to back down easily, so I pushed back. It was getting out of hand until Caroline interrupted again. "Come on, you guys," she scolded them. "Leave him alone, will you?" That cooled things down a bit, but the atmosphere was still tense. "All right then," Caroline continued, as if savoring the moment. "I'll give you all a nice kiss goodnight, and then me and hubby have got to be going." That might have placated them, but it infuriated me. "You kissed one of them, Caroline," I shouted, "and don't bother coming home tonight." "Stand off." People around us began to move away, and the barman started clearing glasses from in front of us. Most of the young men seemed willing to back off, but the two agitators were as fired up as I was. Trouble was brewing, and I was right in the thick of it. Suddenly, two huge bouncers showed up and started pushing us apart. I can't say I wasn't relieved, even though I was ready to go for it. "You lot stay there," one bouncer said to the group of young men, pushing them back before turning to us. "I suggest you get out, mate, while you're still in one piece, and take that troublemaking woman with you. Sometimes you make a stand when your wife is insulted, and sometimes discretion is the better part of valor." I chose the latter and dragged Caroline out behind me. At that moment, I agreed with the bouncer's judgment. The drive home was silent, but once we got there, another screaming match ensued. We didn't speak for 3 days, and I warned her that if she ever did anything like that again, the consequences would be dire. So, what led to the incidents in the changing rooms? "Just a warning shot," she said. "You know I'm not happy that you're working tomorrow morning when we're supposed to be going away, so it was just a warning." Well, in my book, crazy as it was, there's a big difference between flashing her boobs at strangers and actively flirting with them, as she had done before. Truth be told, it had actually turned me on quite a bit. The thought of Caroline wearing her revealing clothes and going topless in her bikini in front of other guys on holiday got me rather excited. It's all a matter of degree, really. I've never minded other guys looking, but touching was an entirely different issue. That night, we had an amazing lovemaking experience like we hadn't had in a long time. The next day, I only had one appointment scheduled with Joshua. Joshua was one of those incredibly authentic guys visiting from America to check out our products. My boss, Kevin, had visited them a couple of weeks prior, and now Joshua was on the return trip to see how we operated. My role was to walk him through the manufacturing process and then take him to see a plant in action. I planned to have a quick lunch with him and then leave, giving me plenty of time to get home, change, and drive to Stansted Airport for our late afternoon flight. Caroline was furious when I told her about my plans, demanding I cancel my meeting with Joshua and arrange for someone else to cover for me. I tried to explain how crucial the meeting was for our company and how securing a foothold in the vast American market could lead to expansion opportunities and even greater prospects for me. She wasn't happy, which likely led to the scene the day before. "You think more of your bloody job than you do of me," she screamed when I refused to cancel. I chose not to remind her of the numerous times we had canceled arrangements due to her commitments at school, knowing all would be fine once we were on the plane. I knew Caroline could be self-centered and righteous at times, but I was aware of that when I married her, so I could hardly complain. I patted her on the bottom, pecked her on the cheek, and confirmed she needed to be ready and packed when I returned in a few hours. "If you're 1 minute late, you'll regret it." Caroline spat with more venom than I thought necessary. The meeting with Joshua went extremely well. I found I got along really well with him, having only met him briefly during his previous visit a few months back. He asked some very probing questions, but I handled them well, and by the end of the morning, I was pretty confident we would soon be finalizing the order. "Where are we going for lunch then?" He asked around 11:30, and I suggested a local pub for a quick bite and a beer. "No," he replied. "Let's go to that place. Mario's where we can sit down more quietly. I still have several things I need to go through with you." I glanced at the time, realized I had some to spare, and agreed. An hour later, we were only halfway through our meal, and he was grilling me with questions I could hardly believe. How much did he want to know about our company and our product, and for that matter about me? I'd better just ring my wife and let her know I might be a bit late. I explained to Joshua as I made my way to the restroom, not wanting him to overhear the outburst I anticipated. I decided to wait another 10 minutes before reluctantly interrupting him to explain why I had to leave. Balking at abandoning such an important client, I realized I still had a bit of time. You what? Caroline yelled over the phone when I told her, unwilling to hear my assurances that we still had some leeway. I warned you, Mark, if you were late, you'd regret it. I'm not missing this holiday, even if I have to go without you. I tried to calm her, but it was futile. By the time I hung up, we were both seething, and she had stopped listening altogether. Deciding to return to Joshua and explain my dilemma, I planned to ask if he could make his way back to our plant on his own. That would save me about 20 minutes, making me just 5 minutes late to my house. Manageable, I hoped. Joshua, being married himself, would surely understand. Well, Mark, he said as I rejoined the table, it's time I came clean with you, since I know you're in a rush and have a plane to catch. Oh, no. What was this about? How did he know? Was he about to drop bad news? I sat down and braced myself for the worst, convinced he was about to cancel the big order I had thought was secured. How had he figured out I was pressed for time? Why hadn't I been upfront about my tight schedule from the start? I want you to come and work for me, Mark, Joshua said confidently. How would you like to move to the States? For a moment, my jaw dropped, refusing to align with my face. Say that again, please, I requested after regaining my composure. All these questions, Mark, I was vetting you. Kevin didn't tell you, but we're planning to license your manufacturing processes in the US, and we need someone with your expertise to help us set it up. But, was all I could stammer before Joshua continued. Kevin suggested you, Mark, as the best man for the job. He doesn't want to lose you, of course, but this deal could make Allscans a fortune over the next decade, and he says you're the one to make it work. Kevin knows? I asked weakly. Of course he does, Mark. He didn't want to say too much until I met you and decided you were the right fit. I sank back into my chair, a warm, exhilarating sensation flooding through me. Moving to America as an executive for a major company, what a dream come true. Caroline would be ecstatic when she heard the news. We often reminisced about our wonderful time there and our desire to return someday. But never in my wildest dreams did I expect to go back under such incredible circumstances. As Joshua outlined the offer, I could hardly believe my ears. A staggering salary, share options, a company BMW, and an apartment until we found our own place. It seemed too good to be true. You've got a plane to catch, young man, he concluded. Perhaps you'll give me your decision after your holiday, when you've had a chance to discuss it with your wife. I'll give it to you now, I blurted out, barely able to contain my excitement. I accept, and I'm certain my wife will agree. We stood up and shook hands, sealing the life-changing deal. Joshua urged me to hurry and pick up Caroline so we wouldn't miss our flight. Walking on air, I checked the time. It would be tight, but manageable. As I headed to the car park, I dialed our home number on my mobile. It rang and rang, but no one answered. 2 minutes past the time I had promised to be back. Reaching my car, I tried Caroline's mobile next. She picked up almost immediately. "Where are you?" she shouted. "On my way home, sweetheart," I replied. "Wait till you hear what I have to tell you." "Bugger you, Mark, you bastard," she interrupted. "You don't care a damn about me, do you?" I hesitated, lost for words, but she filled the silence with her frustration. "Your bloody job, that's all you think about. You don't give a shit about me. I've called Joseph to take me to the airport because I knew you wouldn't make it on time." Joseph. Of course, Joseph Davis, her colleague. The art teacher with an attitude and the man Caroline had kissed during one of our fights. The memory only fueled my disdain. "Caroline," I pleaded. "I'm practically on our road, just 3 or 4 minutes late." "Tough, Mark," she snapped. "I'm already halfway to the airport. If you're not here, I'm going without you." She hung up, and despite my attempts to call her back, there was no response. I glanced at the time and wondered why I was worrying. There was still ample time to get to the airport and check in. Turning the car around, I headed toward Stansted, arriving just as I had predicted, with at least half an hour to spare. After parking and grabbing my ticket, I made my way to the departure terminal, hoping that Caroline had taken my suitcase with her. I searched the terminal for her, but couldn't find her anywhere. Time started to slip away, so I approached the departure desk to ask if my wife had already checked in. "Oh, yes, here it is," said the pretty blonde behind the desk after scanning her list. "She checked in about 15 minutes ago. A Mrs. Wilson and a Mr. Davis. They have seat numbers 24 bits and 24C. What? My startled reaction frightened the poor girl, and I immediately apologized. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "Mrs. Wilson, but not Mr. Davis." Seeing my distress, the girl compassionately double-checked. "No, that's correct," she eventually confirmed. "The tickets were originally for Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, but Mrs. Wilson changed one to Mr. Davis." "Can she do that?" I mumbled, stunned. "Yes," the girl replied, beginning to pity me. "There's a 40-pound charge for changing the name, but she paid it." I stood there, feeling like a refugee, completely at a loss for words or actions. "He had his passport with him, Mr. Wilson," she added apologetically, "so everything seemed above board." I thanked her for her help and walked away from the desk in a daze. What was happening? What on earth was Caroline thinking? This had gone beyond a joke. I glanced at the departures board and saw that the plane hadn't taken off yet. In fact, they hadn't even started boarding. I dashed toward the boarding gate, but was stopped at the counter leading to the departure lounge. No boarding ticket, no entry. It was clear. I argued and pleaded, but when it became obvious they were going to call security, I conceded and headed to the bar. I sat there with my head in my hands, unable to process what was happening. I couldn't believe it. My entire world had turned upside down in the span of half an hour. Caroline couldn't really be going to Spain with that bloody Joseph Davis in my place. It wasn't possible. "Someone please tell me this is just a terrible dream." Then an idea struck me. In hindsight, it wasn't a good one, but it seemed brilliant at the time. I rushed to the other side of the airport and eventually arrived at the observation lounge. In past times, it might have been an open terrace, but due to recent concerns about terrorism, we now had a lookout at the planes through enormous plate glass windows. To my complete surprise, I spotted her, my wife, my Caroline, making her way across the tarmac toward a waiting Boeing 737. I couldn't miss her, of course. Few women had such flowing blonde hair and a trim figure like hers. Then Bloody Davis appeared, getting off the courtesy bus behind her and catching up to follow her toward the plane. When he reached her, I completely lost my composure. Even from that distance, I could see him putting his arm around her slim waist and her leaning back to kiss him on the cheek. The security guards were, I suppose, just doing their job. I know I shouldn't have pounded on the glass window like a madman or shouted the way I did. There was no chance they could hear me anyway, and Caroline didn't even glance back. Eventually, they released me from the detention center without charges, concluding that I was no threat to other passengers. I sullenly made my way back to my car. Trying to reach Caroline's mobile was futile, as expected. What a mess. What a bloody mess. I think I cried that night, but it's hard to say for sure because by the time I staggered home from the local pub, I was too drunk to remember clearly. I couldn't even call her in Spain. I had no number, and her mobile wouldn't work abroad. Around midday the following day, I was awakened by the loud ringing of the phone beside me. Realizing I had fallen asleep on the sofa hugging the phone, I picked it up, groggy and confused. "Hello," I mumbled, unsure of what to expect. "Is that you, John?" came the strident tones of my wife, sounding every bit the schoolteacher she was. "Yes," I answered simply. Well, what?" I replied. "No apologies then, you bastard," Caroline spat out. "Don't you care that you've let me down again?" "I've let you down." I questioned, but she continued her tirade about how I didn't care about her feelings and prioritized my work over her. "What about when you didn't show up for dinner with our new neighbors because of some silly problem at your school?" I reminded her rather ineffectively. And anyway, I got to the airport on time. "That's different, Mark, and you know it," she shouted down the line. From my perspective, it certainly wasn't different. I realized that we were just screaming at each other to no purpose, so I tried to change my approach. Having just woken up, my senses were still dulled, and I had forgotten half of what had happened the previous evening. I decided to tell her about the offer from Joshua. "Caroline," I said more levelly, "there's something I need to tell you about my job. I've been offered." "There you go again," she interrupted, her voice rising. "Your job, your bloody job. That's all you ever think about. What about me here on my own in Spain?" It was then that everything came flooding back to me, and suddenly my love for Caroline felt like it was beginning to crumble. "On your own, Caroline?" I queried. "And what about Joseph Bloody Davis?" She went quiet on the other end, clearly stunned that I knew he was with her. "What about him?" she asked in a softer tone. "Aren't you still in bed with him then?" I pressed on. There was another moment of silence, and then she answered, "What if I am? You deserve it, you bastard. It's all your fault." "What was he like?" I asked spitefully. "Better than you, Mark," Caroline answered nastily. "So eat your heart out, Mr. Nobody." The line went dead as she presumably slammed the phone down. If our marriage wasn't already dead, that last comment might have sealed its fate. The following morning, though not too early, I found myself in Kevin's office discussing the new job. He seemed surprised that I wasn't in Spain, but I dodged giving him a direct answer. "Why didn't you mention the job offer?" I demanded. "I couldn't," he protested. "Not before Joshua had met you properly and decided that you were the man for it." "Thanks a lot," I said sarcastically. "Perhaps that has cost me my marriage." I proceeded to tell him my tale of woe, but to my surprise, he wasn't shocked. "The husband is always the last to know, Mark," Kevin finally said. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing too specific," he explained. "But at the last couple of company events, your wife Caroline has been, well, let's say, putting herself around." "What the hell do you mean by that?" I demanded. He simply shrugged, and I slowly came to my own conclusions. God damn it. Who was this woman that I'd loved and been married to for all those years? "Wait till you see Maylin," Kevin remarked with a smile, attempting to change the subject. "May who?" I asked, not really interested given everything else I had on my mind. "Maylin, she's every man's dream," he said. "Dream?" I queried, still lost. "She's your new secretary. Sorry, personal assistant," he informed me with glee. "An Asian American. I met her last month when I was out there." I just stared at him in disbelief. "Lucky bastard," he said wistfully. "You wait till you see her. You lose one, you gain one." The next few days passed in a bit of a haze, partly because of my marital problems, and also at the speed at which my transfer was taking place. As keen as Joshua was to get me out there working for him, the other party was also pushing to formalize the license. It felt like my feet were hardly touching the ground. Then Caroline called again. I knew she would, and somehow I knew it would be mid-morning. "Hi, lover," she greeted me. "Thought I'd ring you to let you know how wonderful it is here." "I have something to tell you, Caroline," I started, just like before. "Never mind that, lover," she interrupted me again. "Are you ready to apologize yet for your attitude, sweetie pie?" "Look, Caroline," I tried to say, ignoring her mocking tone. "I really have something to tell." "Sorry, lover," Caroline broke in, though I made no great effort to interrupt her. "I still love you dearly, and when you're ready to say sorry, we can get on with our lives. But meanwhile, I've got someone else to keep happy." I simply put the phone down, though I'm not sure whether she beat me to it. Caroline had sounded drunk, not completely out of her mind, but beyond the point of making any sense. If she thought screwing the art teacher was more important than giving us a chance, then that was her problem, not mine. The week continued to be the most extraordinary of my life. On one hand, the most exciting, and on the other, the saddest. Where would it end up? The next call from Caroline was more of a surprise, coming in the early hours of the morning. "Hello, Mark," she mumbled. "I've been thinking. How did you know Joseph was here with me?" "I saw you together getting on the plane," I told her, trying to shake off my sleep and astonished that she would call at this hour to ask such a question. "You were there, Mark. You were really there." "Of course I was there, Caroline," I said, my temper beginning to rise. How the bloody hell do you think I knew that creep Davis was with you? Why didn't you stop us, Mark? Why didn't you do something? Do what? I nearly shouted down the phone. I got there in time for the flight, but you'd already taken the tickets and gone through with your bloody boyfriend, and they wouldn't let me through. I ended up getting arrested. But I thought you weren't coming, Mark. Joseph gave me a lift to the airport, and in a fit of temper, I asked him to come with me. Honestly, I didn't know you were there, honey. And your damn friend Joseph just happened to have his luggage and passport with him by chance, did he? I shot back. Oh shit. Oh, Mark, But I put the phone down on her before she could continue. I think she called several times more, but I was either too busy making arrangements or just didn't answer. Eventually, a few days later, I picked up again. Hi, is that you, Mark? A familiar voice asked. Yes, Caroline, it's me, I replied. What do you want? I want you, Mark. Joseph has been such a bastard, and I need you, her voice quivered. I mumbled something incoherent. I got back to my room last night, and he had some woman in there with him, Caroline cried. Well, how awful for you, I replied, barely masking my sarcasm. Can you imagine that? She continued, oblivious to my tone. How could someone do something like that, Mark? Difficult to imagine, I said, stifling a laugh. To go off with someone else like that behind my back, she mumbled, and I realized she was a bit drunk. How could he? No accounting for folks, I responded in the most sympathetic tone I could muster. Mark, I'm coming home early. I can't stand it here anymore. I get back to Heathrow tomorrow at 4 o'clock. It was the only flight I could get. Can you pick me up? I was about to say no, but then it occurred to me that I actually could. See you at 4 o'clock, I said curtly. Were you trying to tell me something the other day when I phoned Mark? She asked, catching me off guard. Something about your job, was it? Oh, nothing important, Caroline, I told her. I don't want to bother you with my work. She'd find out soon enough anyway. I was ready by 2:30, a bit annoyed when her plane landed 20 minutes late. When she came through the arrivals gate, I waited there like a dutiful husband. I'm quite sure I even had a smile on my face. Hi, Mark, my sweetie. It's so great to see you, she called out as she spotted me. Dropping her case, she wrapped her arms around me and kissed me with all the vigor she could manage. I have to say, she did look fantastic. A suntan always suited Caroline, and her blonde hair perfectly complemented it. The thought that her breasts were probably also tanned ran through my mind, and despite myself, I felt a stirring. Let's get home, sweetie, Caroline whispered to me. I've missed you so much and can't wait to get you into bed and make up with you. All thoughts of her needing an apology from me seemed to have disappeared. It seemed she loved me again. Let's have a coffee or a cup of tea first, I suggested. No, let's get straight home, my wife urged. No, a drink first, I insisted and guided her to a nearby cafe. Good holiday, Caroline. I inquired after getting her a coffee and myself a tea. It started okay, she replied quietly. Sorry if I overreacted a bit. Joseph not as good in the sack as you thought he'd be then. Caroline looked up at me sadly, and a single tear rolled slowly down her cheek. Not really, she began. Then I caught the bastard in bed with one of the maids. In my bed, in my room. I forgot to mention that they had been sharing the room in question, and strictly speaking, it was actually our bed and our room. I was the one who had paid for the damned holiday. Can you believe that, Mark? She continued. We were supposed to be on holiday together, and he went off to make love to someone else, leaving me all alone. That must have been hard for you, my dear, I sympathized. After all, I knew exactly how she felt. Anyway, he'll get what he deserves. Can we go home now, please, Mark? I'm desperate to make it up to you. I tried to tell her that I had attempted several times to share my news with her, but each time she cut me off. That can wait, Mark, she interrupted once again. Let's get home, and you can tell me on the way. I didn't really need to think about it. My mind had been made up a long time ago. Here are the keys to the car. Caroline, I said, having come in her old car since my company car had been returned to Alskins the day before. And here are the keys to the house. They're all yours. Ours, you mean, Mark, don't you? No, just yours. Caroline, just yours, I explained. The titles have all been transferred to you, and the bills are paid until the end of the month. If you decide to sell it, there should be just enough money left over to pay for another couple of weeks in Spain. Caroline looked at me blankly, not understanding what I was telling her. And by the way, I noticed that one of your tires is almost bald, and there's a funny noise coming from the gearbox. Caroline continued to look at me blankly. What I've been trying to tell you, Caroline, I continued, is that I've been offered an incredible job in America. Great salary, amazing benefits, everything I've ever dreamed of. A huge smile lit up Caroline's face as she absorbed the news, which pained me somewhat. When do we move out there? She asked enthusiastically, momentarily forgetting our earlier conversation. I'm leaving on a BA flight in 40 minutes, Caroline, I told her. Do you have a ticket for me as well? She asked excitedly. No, I replied. When will I follow you out then? Caroline pressed. You won't, Caroline, I said softly. I'm sorry, but you won't. 10 minutes later, I walked into the departure lounge alone, leaving Caroline crying her heart out at the counter, unable to follow me past security. My last sight of her, ever, was her tear-stained face, watching me walk out of her life. It was a cruel sense of déjà vu, except the tables had turned. Only 10 days earlier, I had been the one standing at a desk, blocked from following the person I loved. Different airport, different destination, but the heartbreak felt just as intense. Fast forward 9 years, 3 months, and 6 days. I found myself back at Heathrow, in the same terminal I had departed from all those years ago. This wasn't my first return trip, but this time, I had been here for 2 weeks and planned to stay much longer. The licensing agreement with Joshua's company in Huntington, USA, had been an unmitigated success. I rose through the ranks to become the CEO of that division, and I now held a substantial block of shares. Over the years, Joshua had become a personal friend. In another twist of fate, it was through him that Kevin approached me to return to the UK and take over as managing director of Alskins. Kevin was retiring, and the company had grown significantly since I left, much of it due to our partnership in America, which had opened their products to a larger market. It was a move that made sense for everyone, especially for me, as I would be acquiring a substantial ownership stake in the company along with the new position. I waited in the arrivals area, eagerly anticipating the arrival of an old colleague from Joshua's company who had been a tremendous help to me from the very beginning. Though she was no longer working there, it thrilled me to know she would be joining me in the UK. Even before I saw her, I sensed her presence. Every man in the waiting crowd seemed to perk up and draw in their tummies. Mei Lin was even more beautiful than the day I first met her, and her smile lit up the entire terminal as she spotted me. She leaned over to her 2 traveling companions and pointed me out. They rushed towards me with eager excitement. Daddy, Daddy, I've missed you so much, cried Leela, our 5-year-old daughter, as she leaped into my arms. A miniature version of her mother, Leela had already left a trail of broken-hearted young boys behind in America. Hi, Dad, greeted my 8-year-old son, a bit more reserved but smiling brightly. Already tall for his age, I looked forward to seeing him transition from American football to European soccer. Maybe one day he'd play for Arsenal. The first day of the rest of our lives, my lovely wife said as she reached up to kiss me. Indeed, how true. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.